They called me just a burden behind my back while they were signing my name on documents I never agreed to. But when the judge read every line out loud in that courtroom, the only ones who couldn't breathe were my daughter and her husband. Hello, my name is Eleanor. I'm 72 years old, and I live in a small house on the east side of Nashville, Tennessee. Before I tell you what happened, I want to ask you something. The same thing I always ask when I share a piece of my life with strangers who somehow feel less like strangers and more like neighbors. Where are you watching from? I ask because what I'm about to tell you has nothing to do with geography. Betrayal doesn't care if you live in a farmhouse in Georgia or a high-rise in Chicago. It finds you wherever you are comfortable, wherever your guard is down, wherever your love is the most unconditional. And that is exactly where it found me. I was married for 41 years to a man named Harold. He was a quiet man, steady as an oak tree, the kind who didn't say much, but meant every single word he did say. We built our life the slow way, the honest way. We never took a vacation we couldn't afford. We never bought a car that wasn't used. We raised 2 children in that house on Birchwood Lane, and when Harold passed 6 years ago from a heart that had simply worked too hard for too long, he left me with a paid-off home, a modest savings account, and a piece of advice I wrote down and kept in the top drawer of my nightstand. He said, "Eleanor, people will show you who they are if you stop talking long enough to watch them." I thought I understood what he meant. I did not. Not fully. Not until last spring. My daughter, whose name I will not say with any warmth right now, had been living 40 minutes away with her husband for about 8 years. I had always tried to have a good relationship with her husband, though something about him never quite settled right in my stomach. He was the kind of man who smiled a little too wide and talked a little too fast, the kind who could make any idea sound reasonable before you realized it wasn't. My daughter adored him. She thought he was ambitious. I thought ambition without integrity was just hunger wearing a nice shirt, but I kept that to myself because I loved her and I wanted her to be happy. For the most part, things were fine. They came to Sunday dinners. I babysat my grandson when they needed a break. I slipped money into birthday cards and drove 40 minutes to watch school plays and soccer games in the rain. That is what mothers do. That is what grandmothers do. You give because you love, not because you expect anything back. At least, that is what I believed. Then about 18 months ago, my son-in-law started a new conversation. It began casually, the way dangerous things often do, like a car slowly drifting toward the shoulder before the driver realizes the wheel has turned. He started talking about estate planning, about how responsible adults make sure their affairs are in order. He would mention it at Sunday dinner, then again on the phone, then again when he helped me carry groceries one afternoon. He was patient about it in a way that should have struck me as odd but didn't, because I told myself he was being thoughtful. He was being careful with my future. One evening in October, he sat at my kitchen table with a folder and a pen and a tone of voice that was warm and reassuring, and he explained that they had found an attorney who could help me set up a power of attorney. "Just a precaution," he said. "Just in case something happens and you can't speak for yourself. You don't want the state deciding things for you, do you?" My daughter sat beside him, nodding gently, and I remember thinking how lucky I was to have family who cared. I signed the documents. I did not read every page. I trusted the people sitting across from me because they were my blood, and I had spent 7 decades believing that blood meant something permanent. I want to pause here and speak directly to anyone watching who has ever signed something without reading it fully because you trusted the person handing you the pen. I see you. I understand. And I want you to know that what happened next was not your fault, and it was not mine either. It was theirs. Several months passed and nothing felt unusual. I went on with my life the way I always had. Morning coffee on the back porch, tending to the tomato plants Harold had taught me to grow, reading in the evenings, calling my grandson on weekends. I had no reason to suspect anything. That is the cruelest part of being deceived by someone you love. The ground looks perfectly solid right up until the moment it gives way. The morning everything changed started the same as any other. I was sitting with my coffee when my neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Lorraine, who has lived 3 houses down for 20 years, knocked on my back door. She had a look on her face I had never seen before. something caught between discomfort and urgency. She sat down at my table without being asked, which told me whatever she had to say was serious. "Eleanor," she said carefully, "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing by showing you this, but I'd want someone to tell me." She turned her phone around and showed me her Facebook feed. My daughter had posted a photo of a house, a beautiful house, actually, with a wide front porch and new siding and a realtor's sign in the yard with a sold sticker across it. The caption read, "We did it. New chapter begins. Fresh start for our family. So grateful for every door that opened." Beside it was a row of champagne glass emojis. I smiled at first. I thought they had saved up and bought a new home on their own. "Good for them," I told Lorraine. She shook her head slowly. "Eleanor, I did a little digging because something felt off to me." She pulled up a property record she had found through the county assessor's website, the address of the house, the purchase price, and the name listed on the financial disclosure as a funding source. My name, Eleanor Ruth Mackenzie. My savings account had been partially liquidated to fund the down payment on a house I had never been told about, for a family who had posted about it on social media before I had even known it existed. I sat very still for a long time. The coffee in my mug went cold. Lorraine held my hand and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would soften what I was reading. I went back to that folder from October in my mind, the signatures I had made with my own hand, the documents I had trusted without reading, and I understood then what had been done to me. The power of attorney I had signed had been used not as protection but as a key to my savings, a key to my life's work, a key they had taken while I was busy being a good mother and grandmother. The room did not spin. My voice did not crack. I sat at that table and felt something settle in my chest the way ice settles when a pond freezes over, quiet and absolute and irreversible. I thanked Lorraine. I asked her to leave me alone for a little while, and then I pulled out Harold's old legal pad from the drawer where I kept his letter, and I began to write down everything I knew. That night, I did not call my daughter. I did not confront her husband. I did not send an angry message or show up at their door. Part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to pick up that phone and ask her how she could look me in the face every Sunday and know what she had done. But Harold's voice was in my head again. People will show you who they are if you stop talking long enough to watch them. I had been talking too long. I had been explaining and forgiving and assuming the best. It was time to stop talking and start watching. The next morning, I called the bank myself. I explained that I needed a full accounting of every transaction made using the power of attorney authorization over the past several months. The woman on the phone was professional and kind. She pulled the records and read them to me one by one. There were 3 large transfers totaling an amount I will not repeat out loud because even now the number makes my hands tighten. There were also smaller withdrawals, charges that looked like attorney fees, and a home inspection, and a moving company. They had not just used my money for a down payment, they had used it for the whole process, start to finish, without ever once mentioning it to me. When the bank representative finished reading, she paused and said, "Mrs. Mackenzie, are you aware of all these transactions?" I said no. She said, "Then you need to speak with an attorney today. Not tomorrow. Today." I called a lawyer that same afternoon, a woman named Patricia Haynes, whose name I had found in the church directory years ago and never needed until now. She asked me to come in the next morning and to bring every document I had. I gathered everything I could find. The original folder from October. The bank records the bank had emailed me. Lorraine's screenshots of the property listing and the social media post. I put them in a manila envelope and labeled it in Harold's handwriting style. Careful and deliberate. Each letter deliberate. I don't know why I did it that way. I suppose I needed him close to me that night. Patricia Haynes had gray hair cut short and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the kind of calm that comes from decades of sitting across the table from people in the worst moments of their lives. She read through everything I brought her without rushing. When she looked up, she did not soften what she was about to say, which I respected enormously. "Eleanor," she said, "what you've described is financial elder abuse. The power of attorney was used outside its authorized scope. Funds were moved without your direct consent or knowledge, and the primary beneficiaries are your daughter and her husband. This is a civil matter, and potentially a criminal one. I asked her what my options were. She told me, we could pursue civil action to recover the funds. We could also file a complaint with the state's Adult Protective Services, which would trigger an investigation. And depending on what that investigation found, the district attorney's office could decide to pursue criminal charges. She looked at me carefully. Some families in your situation choose to handle this privately, she said. Others go the full legal route. Either way, you have rights, and those rights have been violated. I thought about it for less than 1 minute. I had given that family every soft option that existed. I had been generous and forgiving and endlessly patient. What I had never been was firm. What I had never done was let the consequences fall where they were meant to fall. I told Patricia to proceed with everything available to her. What followed was a period of waiting that tested every bit of patience I had ever developed. Patricia filed the necessary complaints. Investigators began reviewing the documents. My bank flagged the account and launched its own internal review. I was told not to contact my daughter or her husband and not to give any indication that anything was happening. I went about my life as normally as I could. It was not easy. They called, as they always did. Sunday dinners happened and I attended them because Patricia said it was important that I not change my behavior. I sat across from my son-in-law and watched him pour wine and laugh at his own jokes and help my grandson with a puzzle on the living room floor, and I thought, you have no idea. You genuinely have no idea. And there was a part of me that found a cold kind of peace in that. They thought I was exactly what they had always thought I was, a quiet old woman with good recipes and bad eyesight who would never connect the dots. My daughter posted about the new house constantly. Every weekend there was a new photo. Paint colors being chosen, furniture being assembled, a housewarming party I was invited to and attended because Patricia told me to. I stood in the kitchen of a house paid for with my retirement savings and accepted compliments on the deviled eggs I had brought and smiled and watched my son-in-law accept congratulations from their friends. Every photo she posted was a document. Every caption was evidence. I printed them all when I got home each Sunday, just as I had done with the bank records, and I added them to the envelope. One evening, about 6 weeks into the investigation, Lorraine came by again. She had found something else while browsing online, not snooping, she was careful to say, just happened to see it. My son-in-law had been on a local real estate investment forum bragging about what he called a creative family financing arrangement that allowed them to purchase their new property without a traditional loan. He said he had found a way to leverage existing family assets through a properly structured legal instrument. He was proud of himself. He had even answered questions from other people on the forum about how to set up something similar with elderly relatives. I read it twice, and then I called Patricia from Lorraine's kitchen and read it to her over the phone. She was silent for a moment, and then she said, "Eleanor, keep that. That is significant." The investigation moved quickly after that. Adult Protective Services completed their review. The state's Elder Abuse Unit became involved. Patricia coordinated with them and with the bank. What emerged from the review was a clear picture. The power of attorney documents I had signed had been altered before they were filed. Language had been added after my signature that expanded the scope of what my son-in-law could authorize. That was the part that changed everything. It was no longer just a civil dispute about how family money was used. It was fraud, document fraud. And the district attorney agreed. Charges were filed on a Wednesday morning. I know it was a Wednesday because I had been to my standing hair appointment that morning and was home making soup when Patricia called. "Eleanor," she said, "the warrants have been issued. They'll be served today. Are you all right?" I stood in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear and the smell of chicken broth in the air, and I thought about Harold. I thought about all the years we had worked and saved and stretched every dollar. I thought about my daughter as a little girl sitting at this same table doing her homework while I made soup in this same pot. And I felt the weight of all of it, the love and the grief and the anger and the sadness, all at once, all together, like weather moving through. I told Patricia I was all right. And I meant it. I did not go to watch them be arrested. That was never something I needed. This was not about a scene. It was not about witnesses or humiliation or watching their faces fall. I had no interest in spectacle. What I needed was for the truth to exist in official record, for what they had done to be named and documented and treated as the crime it was, not a family misunderstanding, not a miscommunication, not something to be smoothed over at Sunday dinner with an apology and a promise to do better. My son-in-law was taken from his office. My daughter was taken from the new house, the one with the wide front porch, and the housewarming party where I had brought deviled eggs and smiled and said the kitchen was lovely. I learned these details later from Patricia. I did not ask for them, but she told me because she said she thought I deserved to know. My phone began ringing that evening. My daughter's number, over and over. Then her husband's number. Then numbers I didn't recognize that turned out to be family members who had heard and wanted to know what I had done. My daughter left a voicemail. Her voice was ragged and she was crying in a way that sounded genuine. And I will tell you honestly that it hurt me to hear it, because I am her mother and that never stops meaning something, no matter what. But she said, "Mom, how could you do this to us over money?" And that was where the hurt turned back into clarity. It was not over money. I would have given her that money 100 times over if she had simply asked. What I could not give, and what she had never thought to ask for, was my consent. I did not call back. I let the silence carry the answer. The days that followed were strange and still, and full of unexpected grace. Lorraine brought casseroles. My grandson called because he had heard something had happened between me and his parents, and he wanted to make sure I was okay, which made me cry in the good way for the first time in months. My pastor came by and sat with me on the back porch for 2 hours, and we did not talk about any of it, just about Harold and the garden and the way early summer feels in Nashville when the air is warm and the sky goes pink at dusk. I had not expected to feel relief. I had expected to feel devastated, broken by what had been revealed about a relationship I had spent 30 years trying to nurture. And there was grief in it. There is still grief in it. But beneath the grief was something I had not felt in years: room to breathe. The particular kind of quiet that comes when you stop carrying something you were never meant to carry alone. A few weeks later, I met with Patricia again, and we talked about the civil recovery process. The bank had already flagged the unauthorized transactions and begun a review that would likely result in partial restitution. The criminal case would take longer, she told me. These things always do. But the evidence was clear, and the documentation was thorough, and whoever had believed that I would not notice or would not act had been wrong on both counts. I also changed my will. I sat in Patricia's office with a clear head and a steady hand, and I made decisions about my estate that reflected the truth of my situation, not the hope of one. I redirected the portions I had once assigned to my daughter and her husband. Some of it I left to my grandson directly, held in trust until he turned 25. Some I left to a domestic violence shelter in Nashville that Harold had once donated to without telling me, which I only discovered after he passed when I found the thank you letters in his desk. The rest I directed to a legal fund for elderly victims of financial abuse, because if any piece of what happened to me could become armor for someone else, then it was worth something. My daughter and her husband are awaiting trial as I record this. I am not permitted to discuss the specifics of the pending case, and I would not do so anyway. That is in the hands of the system and the attorneys and the court. What I can tell you is what I have learned, and I believe that is the part worth saying out loud. I used to believe that being a good mother meant never allowing your children to face the full weight of what they had done. I spent decades intercepting consequences, softening landings, explaining away behavior that I should have confronted directly. I told myself this was love. I told myself that protecting someone you love from pain was the highest form of care. What I understand now is that there is a difference between protecting someone from pain and protecting them from accountability. One is love. The other is a different thing entirely, and it wears love's face so convincingly that you can spend a very long time before you recognize the difference. The house on Birchwood Lane is still mine. The tomato plants Harold taught me to grow are coming up this year, maybe better than ever. Lorraine and I have started taking walks in the evening when the heat breaks, and she makes me laugh harder than anyone has in years. My grandson visited last month, and we spent a whole Saturday baking bread and watching old movies and talking about his plans for college, and in those hours I felt more like myself than I had in longer than I can say. I am 72 years old. I am not finished. I am not invisible. I am not a burden, not a resource, not a signature waiting to be collected. I am a woman who built a life and protected it when protecting it was the hardest thing I have ever done. To anyone watching who has felt like the quiet one, the easy one, the one who always forgives and absorbs and moves on, I want you to hear this. Quiet is not the same as powerless. Patience is not the same as permission. And love, real love, has boundaries. It has to. Otherwise, it is not love. It is just an open door. I'll end the way I began. Where are you watching from? And I want to ask you something more. Has anyone in your life ever mistaken your kindness for weakness? If they did, what did you do about it? Tell me in the comments, because I read them, every one. And if no one has told you today, you still matter. You always did.